I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. And today I have made it rain with the time-honored trick of leaving my laundry hanging overnight. Every plant in my part of California has me to thank. And I want to talk today about two things that I think are related. One I'm calling Appalachian Rage, and the other is naive do-gooders or knee-jerk liberals, whichever term you prefer. On Matt Taibbi's Substack, I started a very lively comment thread talking about what I termed white trash racism, which is racism against those who are seen to be white trash. And that has gotten a lot of provocative comments. So I want to discuss that and then go a little bit further on some of the ideas on my last thread, the Economics of Anarchy, and then talk about how we can put this all together and develop a plan that helps us get out of both sides of this dilemma. Let's start it. The Matt Taibbi articles on which I posted were responses to Alex Moyer's, who's done the film TFW No GF, which I understand now is internet slang for that feeling when no girlfriend. And so it's about what have become called incels, involuntary celibates. And she interviewed young men, young white men who were alienated, who felt looked down on, and who really were doing things just to be provocative, just to be a part of the discussion. And she does it in a way that is more than respectful, that's friendly, that's curious, that is looking at people, not as potential psycho killers. And that is something that was very interesting to me. And after Matt did his interview with her and I responded to it, he then posted a second article about the film called Hate But Don't Look. And because I had composed my comment for the first one, I was able to cut and paste and get in the third comment on the second one. So between the two, it's gotten a lot of response. My comment said that I think what we're dealing with is white trash racism, by which I mean racism by liberals against what they perceive to be white trash. I had just come back from 3 weeks in Appalachia, where I was fixing up my childhood home. And there's a pervasive sense of being rejected by the degreed class, especially if you're white and male. And that back in the liberal bastion that I call home now, they were throwing the book at two young white males. That these kids, I think 20 and 21, had driven over a mural which was on the sidewalk in front of City Hall and consisting only of the words Black Lives Matter. And they had burnt rubber, somewhere on it. That our town wanted to throw the book at them. They wanted $100,000 in fines, and then they wanted to put them away for up to 5 years as a hate crime. So the judge went back to what the original proposal was in order to paint those words, and that was less than $20,000. So the kids asked if they could do restitution, if they could paint the words again themselves. That was rejected. The trial hasn't happened, but in the meantime, these kids have left town because there's so much hostility. There are Black residents who say, I can't even go to work anymore because I'm so afraid. Now, my town is 1% Black. We are 33% Latino, but they seem able to still go to work. So if these kids felt like that was a statement that their lives did not matter, we've just proven that to them. One person who responded said that he felt that the contempt for the untouchable white working class was palpable. He felt it every time he talked about politics with his uncle, even though he was a blue-collar married guy who owned a home and his uncle was a degreed person who was unemployed, that he was always made to feel as if he knew nothing. And I responded back talking about a story that I mentioned in another video, how whites were trashed. And in that, I was in my hometown, and there's a famous bike trail that goes through, and I looked up at the farmer's market to see a couple of my neighbors from Santa Cruz who were riding that trail. This was just before the election where Trump won. And in that, they said, "Oh, look at all these Trump signs. This place is so racist." Now, I have yet to meet a kid who is not biracial there, but be that as it may. And they went on to talk about meeting another professor from the nearby college town out there and having that professor call my town Scumberland for Cumberland. And they didn't seem to see that that could be at all racist, to call an entire town of people scum. The discussion on that thread then went in the direction of what constitutes real work, and someone named Trolificus posted a quote from Ed Abbey that was solicited by the New York Times for Earth Day but then rejected. He wrote, "If America could be once again a nation of self-reliant farmers, craftsmen, hunters, ranchers, and artists, then the rich would have little power to dominate others, neither to serve nor to rule. That was the American dream." That was also what Ben Franklin talked about when he said that the objective of the economy is to give someone a self-sufficient means of making a living. And so I quoted Wendell Berry back from my book, which is from The Gift of Good Land. He wrote, "What one thinks of this disintegration and decline will depend on one's opinion of the U.S. economy and on one's confidence in it. If one believes that it is better to buy food than to grow it, then one is not going to worry about the decline of any particular farming community, especially if that community is based on subsistence farming. I am worried about the decline of farming communities of all kinds, because I think that among the practical consequences of that decline will sooner or later be hunger. In some respects, the traditional subsistence agricultures are the best assurances of a continuous food supply, simply because they are not, or were not, dependent on outside sources that must be purchased. To exchange these locally self-sufficient subsistence agricultures for the good life of a consumer economy is like climbing out of a lifeboat onto a sinking ship." What Ed Abbey and Ben Franklin and Wendell Berry describe as the American ideal is what Appalachia was at its beginning until Alexander Hamilton got hold of it. And I make this point especially because I've had an ongoing discussion with Matt Ehret, and Matt Ehret sees Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton as both representing this American economic system. And I keep saying that can't be true because they were opposite, that what Ben Franklin wanted was something that was small and sovereign and that had a system of reciprocity within it because it was backed by the housing. So in this book, Ramp Hollow, The Ordeal of Appalachia, Stephen Stoll is an amazing historian, and he talks about how Hamilton put in the whiskey tax. And the reason that the whiskey tax was so destructive was that it forced a monetary system on people who had a system of exchange. And because they didn't have to deal with money, this pushed them into debt, and debt pushed them into losing their land. This is the same trick that was used in South Africa in order to force people into going into the mines. They passed primogeniture, which made it so that only the oldest son could inherit the land. And that meant that they had to pay taxes on it by sending the second son off to work in the mines and to be able to survive if they could. The other way that this land was taken away also goes back to Hamilton and the financier of the Revolutionary War, who he worked for, Robert Morris. Robert Morris ended up owning 800,000 acres, much of it Appalachia, and much of it given to him. This was so that he would develop it, but it was never profitable to actually develop it. And so other people did. Other people lived on it. They developed it. They built homesteads on it. And those people were never able to get titles to their land. They wrote them themselves. They got whatever transfers. They paid taxes often on that land, but they didn't have the paper to prove it. And therefore, when the mining companies came in, they were able to dispossess all of the people who had been on that land for generations. When the coal mining company did come in, they tricked the people. They told them that they were just buying what was under the land and that they could have everything that was on top. But what they didn't tell them was that they needed to strip everything from the surface in order to get to what was below. So they deforested 200,000 acres and then strip mined. And when they were done raising and raping the land, then this became an internal labor colony so that steel mines could find cheap labor there. One of the responders said that she grew up on the border of West Virginia near Ohio and then went off to college and went to Philly, but then came back to take care of her mother. When she came back after the steel mill had gone, everything was deserted, that places that had been suburban town houses now were abandoned and boarded up, that there were trailers on the edge of town with signs that said girls on them. So she sees this as being something that was thrown away once they had lost their usefulness, like an old rag. What does this have to do with naive do-gooders and knee-jerk liberals? Something that Robert Malone has been writing about are the Dutch farmer protest, where in the Netherlands, farmers are being forced to reduce their herds by half, who are being dispossessed of their land, of their livelihoods. And this is all in the name of climate change, of reducing all of that methane that's in the air. Now, Russell Brand also writes about this when he talks about Bill Gates and all the farmlands that he's buying up. But he doesn't talk as much about vegetarian and veganism and how that ends up buying into this whole idea that that's where the damage is being done by meat production. If we were talking about real mitigation of climate change, we'd be looking at regenerative agriculture, which herds animals tightly so that they restore the grasslands and pull the carbon back out of the air, and is the only known way to reverse climate change. But instead, we're taking a superficial tact on it. And I talk about that in my episode, Animal Husbandry is the New Vegetarian. Naive do-gooders are all about protecting poor little Ukraine from big bad Russia. Their support has caused militarization of Ukraine, which has resulted in the deaths of thousands of Ukrainians along with Russians, which could have been over within a few weeks if we had allowed Putin to go in and take away the neo-Nazis, the weapons of bioterrorism, and all of the nuclear weapons that are pointing at Russia. There's also been the sanctions, and those are going to really hit Europe hard this winter, where they're telling Germans that they should go and collect sticks. How much loss of life is that going to result in if that continues over the winter? In a tragic story, my Cumberland handyman told me that his uncle in West Virginia took his life because he was losing his house and he couldn't make a living as a trucker because of the price of diesel. That's the sort of thing that makes me so angry at this blue and white flag waving. That empty virtue signaling has real consequences. He's left 3 grandchildren and a wife who were dependent on him, a family of brothers and sisters who would have loved to help out if they had known. But these are the people who are living on the edge and doing real work. And those are the people who are being impacted, not that person with their laptop who's busy waving that flag to produce green energy. To apply this to the economic plan that I've been talking about in the last couple of episodes, I've been chatting with Doc Hollywood on my Substack comments thread. And one of our topics has been free education, which he feels is a human right and that students should also get a living stipend while they're studying. The question that I've asked him is that if you're going to subsidize students and give them a free education and a stipend to live on, who are you going to make their slaves? Who are going to be the people who do the work that make that stipend worth something? Because if they're going to be able to buy food, someone else has to produce it. So you have to divide into your educated class and into your people who do the work. And I think that whether you do that by having tests or exams or have a certain amount of money or whatever it is that allows you to separate those two groups, it doesn't serve the purpose. It takes away from the people who are doing the work their ability to think, to learn, to teach, to be all of the things that Wendell Berry and Ed Abbey say that we can be, and that Benjamin Franklin imagined us as the American system and what we could be personifying to the rest of the world. I'd like to end with the lyrics to a song by Josiah and the Bonnevilles called Appalachia. Far too many times I've held it in, Appalachian rage and the northbound wind. My mind is growing strong, but my body's wearing thin. I can't turn this thing around. You might see it every now and then, Appalachian sorrow running down my skin, thinking of tomorrow and the things that might have been. I'm just trying to live it down. And it ends with, when they lay my body in the green, green grass, I will whisper secrets to the animals that pass about the times that I said I was never coming back, but I lied. I am Appalachia. And I too am Appalachia. Where do I send you from here? How about to this one, How Whites Were Trashed? And then this one, Animal Husbandry is the New Vegetarian. Thank you for being a part of my community. And I am so glad that we are resolving the division of politics.